Hi, Sierra.
Hi, Jason.
I'm going to do a quick overview of how to use the timeline area down here. And the way to do that is I'm going to want to go ahead and build a flow first, just so that we've got some content to play with. So I'm going to add the global life expectancy data. And immediately we get a set of dots in space. Set the camera. Let's go ahead and add another step. And now we're on step 2. I'm going to turn this into a scatter plot. Let's go ahead and put the year on the width axis, format that as a year, and we'll put the life expectancy on the depth axis. And there we go. I'm going to set the camera. Let's go ahead and add another step. I know I'm going quick here. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how quick it is to build a little bit of content, and then we'll go ahead and talk through some of these interfaces. So I added the third dimension on the country line. I set the camera, and you can see this structure pretty well. Let's go ahead, and part of this is to know how to get to and interact with the connections. So I've added that. We'll go back to the swarm here, and I'm also going to add some labels. And let's go ahead and show a label when the label is present. And let's just show the country and maybe life expectancy, like so. Okay, so now you can see that on these first few steps, the timeline shows us exactly what's visible when. The first step is just the swarm, is the random swarm. The second step is still only showing the swarm, but now it's a scatter plot. And the third step showing the swarm plus connections, see the lines, plus labels. Let's go ahead and add a few more objects in here so we've got a little bit more to work with. Just added a new text by hitting the plus text button, and we'll just call this life expectancy. And as I type that in, okay, so now I've got a piece of text just for sense of argument. Okay, so that's going to be visible only on this step. If I go back a step, that object, it's still there, actually in space, but it's not visible. So now that we've got a little bit of timeline, what I'd like to do is show you a little bit of how the timeline works. So each one of these squares tells you whether that particular object is visible or not. So right here, I can see that we only have the swarm visible. Double clicking actually makes it invisible. It doesn't delete it. It just makes it invisible. Double clicking again makes it visible. So that's the way you can turn on and off any particular object on a particular step. You can navigate to different steps using the boxes on the top here. Click here, I go to step 2. Click here, I go to step 1. You can also click directly on a box, and it will take you to that step and select it. So you can see it automatically took me to step 2. Another thing you can do is you can actually click and drag from one step to another. So I'm just dragging the connections from step 3 to step 2, and you see that the connections now appear on step 2. Just to make that clear, I'm going to do the same thing. Click on label, drag, release. Now the labels are also visible on step 2. Getting kind of ugly there because there's not enough room without the third dimension. So we'll just go ahead and double click to turn those off. So the basic structure here of how the timeline works, those are the main things I want to communicate. Turning things on and off, being able to select, click and select to get to any particular object. And it goes without saying that when I click on an object, it appears over here, all the parameters, which you can then start to manipulate. Another thing I did when I created this is using these buttons here. So add step. First thing it's going to do is just going to duplicate that same step. And the most obvious thing I might do is just scroll out with my mouse wheel and set the camera. And now when I go back and forth between those two steps, the only thing that's changing is the camera position. And there's a variety. You can see that you can get around pretty well with these steps, but maybe you want to delete a step or rearrange the step. Those are accessed in the steps detail. So right now I'm on step 3. I can click this little move icon and drag it up. And now step 1 is the random, step 2 is the 3-dimension, and step 2 goes back flat and then back to 3 dimensions. So you can click and drag them there. You can also delete a step right here. So that gives you a basic structure for how you can edit and delete steps. Sierra, did I miss anything? What else should I have mentioned?
I think that's it. I mean, if you wanted to talk maybe a little bit about the preview window or the reset camera button, those are two other things that I find myself using sometimes.
Sure. So it's a good point. So you can tell that when I zoom in here, I'm using the wheel on my mouse to zoom in. I can set the camera. I showed you that. But now, where am I in space? Maybe I would like to know, get myself back to ground zero. So I just hit the reset camera button. In space, this is a 1 meter by 1 meter object. Hard to tell on a flat screen, but if you were in AR or VR, it actually looks like it's a meter wide. And the camera at this point is, when you reset the camera, it sets it back to 2 meters away, looking at the center point of that object in space. So that helps you understand a little bit about what set camera and reset camera does. Now, preview is a really handy button to get a sense of how this looks on a full screen. Now, remember, different people's monitors are going to have different aspect ratios. This is our monitor set to 1920 by 1080, which is the most typical monitor these days. But I mean, that's not necessarily how everyone will see it. So you might want to, scroll out a little bit, give yourself a little room on the edges for different size monitors. Hopefully that's a good overview, and we'll move on to more sophisticated parts and pieces of the Flow Editor in additional videos.